The American dream. Work hard, start from the bottom, keep working hard, and eventually you're going to get rewarded and make it big. Get a fancy house, maybe a car, a nice job, maybe even a business, have the perfect family, and live happily ever after. And not just you, your entire generations after you can expect to live the same. This is what the perception of America used to be, and why a lot of immigrants actually came to America in the first place, starting off with the Italians and the Irish centuries ago, moving on to Asian immigrants as well from Japan, China, and other countries, and a third wave with more Indian immigrants and more tech-focused immigrants coming in. It has always been the case, or at least it's been thought, that if you come to America and you work hard, you can get what you want from life, and you will be rewarded. This goes into the Declaration of Independence itself, where it says that all men are created equal and have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. How true is this though? Can you actually come to America, start from the bottom, and make it to the top, leave whatever's hurting you in your hometown or your home country, and ensure that you have a nice standard of living? It turns out, looking at the data, that this dream might actually be a nightmare for most people if they choose to come to America now, or even if they choose to move to a different city within America itself to pursue the American dream. The concept of the American dream relies on the middle class. Everybody being able to afford a house, a car, have a decent job, being able to provide for their family or loved ones is a central tenet of the American dream. And since 1970, everybody's actually been better, the lower, middle, and upper class. But the problem is that the upper class has gotten a larger percentage of the income, 48% to be exact, with the middle class coming in at 43% and lower income households having only 9% of total income. This reflects income inequality all across the United States of America. But there being sort of two classes now, either people who earn a lot of money or people who earn not so much. This was an analysis of income. Wealth is even more uneven. The wealth of the middle class is yet to recover from the Great Recession. In fact, US families are only $20,000 roughly better off than they were in 1983, taking into account inflation. Upper income families hold 79% of the country's wealth, with the middle class only holding 17%. And in fact, upper income families were the only income tier able to build on their wealth from 2001 to 2016, a 15-year period. Middle income families actually saw their net worth shrink by 20%, and lower income families experienced a loss of 45%. All this to say that upper income families had 7.4 times as much wealth as middle income families and 75 times as much wealth as lower income families. It would be okay if this was always the case, but this is actually up from 3.4 and 28 respectively in 1983. This number might be worse than it seems because middle income and lower income families have a larger percentage of their wealth tied up in houses and were extremely financially damaged with the financial crisis of 2008 when the housing market crashed. The rich are definitely getting rich faster, with the top 5% seeing a near 100% rise in wealth from 1998 to 2007, and the bottom fifth seeing only a 15% approximate rise. Now, this would all be okay if the United States was not a one-off and it was a worldwide phenomenon where rich people were getting richer everywhere. But amongst G7 countries, it has the worst inequality, and income ratios of the top 10% compared to the bottom 10% have gotten significantly worse over the decades. The biggest argument here is that, so what if the rich are getting richer, if the poor and the middle class also have a chance of getting rich? It's all okay. Well, the thing is, that's not the case. If you were born in 1940, according to research, and you were in the bottom percentile of income, your chances of out-earning your parents was 95%. If you were in the middle class or the 50th percentile, it was 93%. And if you were in the top percentile, it was 41%. If you move on to 1980, this probability decreases to 45%, less than half for the middle class. It goes to 8% for the top earners and 79% for low-income earners. A big culprit for the stagnation of the middle class is the lack of wage growth. If you convert the minimum wage in 1964 to 2018 dollars, it comes out to 20.27. The average hourly wage in 2018 was 22.65. This represents an increase of 11.7% over the course of 54 years. Over the same 50 years, housing prices have more than doubled and food prices have seen an increase of sometimes even 50%. So that means, in fact, the middle class has lost money over the previous decades, to the the tune of sometimes even 150% given inflation. This research only goes to Gen X since millennials and Gen Z are young and income trends have not yet established properly, but you can imagine the probabilities are going to be even lower for the future generations. So far, we've only talked about the differences in actual money or capital when it comes to social mobility and how, over the course of time, it's less likely that people break out. Another almost completely ignored concept when it comes to mobility is social capital. Social capital simply is the connections that you make, the friends that you have, the people that you surround yourself with, the language that you speak, how you speak it, i.e. the accent that you have. In simpler terms, because of cognitive biases, you're more likely to hire someone like you, you're more likely to invest in someone's business that you like and you think is similar to you, and all of this plays a huge part in the amount of wealth that you accumulate and how successful you are. Professor Raj Chetty did an exhaustive research on social capital and the role it plays in social mobility. And what he found was that friendship networks are strongly class-based, especially at the top. People are more likely to be friends with people of a similar socioeconomic status, especially at the top of the ladder. In fact, 1 in 3 people in the top income percentile are friends with people in the same decile, compared to just 24% in the bottom half of the income distribution. Rich people are also able to afford college and have an extensive network there, with most of them having relationships built in college, whereas middle class people and people in the lower income classes sometimes cannot afford to go to college and mostly befriend their neighbors. Going to college not only allows you to meet people from different walks of life, it also allows you to meet people in different fields, get newer experiences, and ask for favors from your new connections. If your neighbors are your friends, that's also a good thing, but they're not probably going to be able to open your mind to new experiences or get you that one referral that's going to open doors. And this is seen all across the United States, not just in cities, not just in rural areas. In fact, even in areas with more diversity, friendships remain strongly class-based. Perhaps the most concrete finding of this research, and I do encourage you to look at it, it's available for free and it's pretty amazing that we have such good data points on the internet. Anyways, the most important part of this research is that they found out that economic connectedness is the only form of social capital that boosts social mobility. Economic connectedness simply means the extent of friendships you have across class lines. Or in simpler terms, the share of above median social capital friends that below median social capital people have. And in some areas where the middle class is strong, this trend is even more pronounced. For example, Minneapolis has a much higher economic connectedness score at 0.98 compared to Indianapolis at 0.65. And children who grew up in low-income families in Minneapolis have much higher incomes in adulthood compared to children in Indianapolis. In Minneapolis, children of similar low-income levels reach the 43rd percentile of the household income distribution on average at age 35 years, compared with reaching just the 34th percentile in Indianapolis. Place matters for social mobility, and some places are more interconnected between classes than other places. In other words, if you can live in a more connected place, that's going to be better for you than living in just an entirely rich place. Rich people in Manhattan, for example, might not be that open to making social connections with people from the lower or middle income tiers, but rich people in Austin or Miami or other major cities might be more receptive to other backgrounds, and that is what is going to lead to your social mobility. Not everybody has that luxury though to move cities or towns and live in a more interconnected environment, and that means that the decline of the middle class still remains a big problem. One of the factors that furthers this decline is the decline in wages for college graduates. Full-time jobs with good benefits, including healthcare, insurance, etc., are essential in giving young people the opportunity to save at a young age, where they can take advantage of compound interest and really grow their earnings. The problem is, since the year 2000, real average wages for college graduates have been on the decline, with the average wage being only $17 in 2014 compared to above $18 in 2000. This is especially bad for women, where the average wage is only $15.25, with men earning $19.15 compared to roughly $20 in the year 2000. The share of college graduates with healthcare is also down 22% since the year 2000, and the share of high school graduates having healthcare is also down by 14%. With young college workers earning even less and getting less benefits, CEO pay has not fallen down, surprisingly, with the average CEO making 296 times what a typical worker makes. And what adds to young people's and the middle class's frustration is that wages have not risen in line with productivity. According to research, if wages rose along with productivity, the minimum wage should be $18.42. In fact, the federal minimum wage still sits at $7.5, with real minimum wage being even lower at $7.25. So for the last few decades, the middle class has been working harder than ever ever, getting paid less, getting less benefits, and seeing their CEO make 296 times of what they make. And with over 90% of companies in the S&P 500, the 500 biggest companies in America, saying that they're going to take advantage of gig and contract workers, this trend does not seem to be reversing anytime soon. The reason why they prefer gig and contract workers is A, because they can undercut their wages, and B, they don't have to classify them as full-time employees and pay them healthcare benefits along with other retirement benefits. So probabilities are, if you're not rich, you're probably not going to reach the top 1%. You're earning less, you're getting less benefits, you're working harder than ever. Well, at least you have good education and healthcare, right? Education is a tool that people use to earn higher, make more connections, and achieve social mobility. Unfortunately for the middle class, tuition and fees have jumped 132% for private national universities, out-of-state tuition and fees have jumped 127%, and in-state tuition and fees have jumped 158%. So that means on average, even if you go to an in-state university, across the country you'll have to pay slightly above $10,000 per tuition year. That is $40,000. And keep in mind, this is just tuition alone, not the cost of books, rent, and other expenses that go into being a student. Well, that's okay. Maybe you're not going to go to university. At least if you hurt yourself or need a medical checkup, you're going to be able to afford to do that, right? About 50% of US adults say that it is difficult to afford healthcare costs, and 1 in 4 say that they or a family member in their household had problems paying for healthcare in the past 12 months. To add on to this, younger adults and those with lower incomes are more likely to report having problems affording healthcare. This means that 1 in 4 adults, or 25%, have put off getting healthcare just because of the cost of healthcare, but this number being notably high at 60% in uninsured adults. Not just with getting healthcare, this also is seen in getting prescriptions, with 1 in 5 or 21% of adults saying that they haven't filled a prescription just because they cannot afford to do so, and instead have searched for over-the-counter alternatives online. To add on to this, 1 in 10 or 10% of adults have said that they've cut pills in prescriptions that they've gotten just because they cannot afford to refill those prescriptions. One thing that really stops the process of social mobility is having debt, and 41% of Americans report that they have had to take debt because of not being able to pay for healthcare insurance. And with nearly 50% of US adults not being able to afford a healthcare expense of $1,000 if it's unexpected, this is going to continue to be a problem even well into the future. The lack of government funding and attention to initiatives like lowering tuition costs or healthcare costs are a controversial topic in the United States, but the effect of having debt is clear. The more debt you have, the less likely you are to save and invest in assets, and the less likely you are to achieve social mobility. And with over 43 million people having an average debt balance of $37,000, this problem is going to keep on getting worse until the debt crisis is solved. This also seems to be an America-specific problem, with other wealthy countries and G7 nations paying less than half of what America spends on healthcare and still having higher rates of affordability. That's okay. You take on debt, that is a personal decision that you make, and this debt that you take on is going to get you a high-paying job, and you're going to be able to afford a house. Right? The median sale price for a house in the United States was $417,700 in 2023 in Q4. In Q4 of 1980, this price was $66,400. If you're too sad to do the math, I did it for you. The average price for a house today is 6.36 times higher than the average price in 1980. And not just ownership costs, renting costs are high as well, with 46% of Americans, including 23% of people who say that we are spending more than 50% of our income on housing. Over the last 5 years, renters have seen their rents rise by over 18%, outpacing inflation by quite a lot. And since renters tend to skew to being lower income or middle class, this exacerbates the problem of income inequality and being able to achieve the American dream. 61% of people in the lowest quartile, or the lowest 25% of income earners, rented their homes, with this number shooting up to 88% when you take into account net worths. Only 10.5% of people in the top quartile, for example, were renters. Speaking of the American dream, younger Americans and people of color, including Black or Hispanic people, are more likely to be renters, with this being very clear in the numbers. According to research, 35% of people were renters in the United States. Households headed by Black or African American adults are more likely than the population overall at 57%, with Latino households coming in at 52%. This cost is not going anytime soon, with average rent expected to increase by 10% over the coming years. According to critics of extreme wealth concentration, corporation, billionaires and ultra-rich people lobby for benefits that only they get. For example, tax breaks for corporations, tax breaks for capital gains, and other forms of wealth instruments that middle-class and lower-income people do not have, and tax breaks on profits and employing a certain number of people, while at the same time limiting their wages and not giving them enough benefits. This lobbying has, according to some, led to the current state of American healthcare and the debt crisis that the education system faces. So maybe achieving the American dream is not as easy as possible, but people are still optimistic. 46% of people surveyed, according to research, have said that they are well on their way to achieving the American dream, with only 17% saying that it's completely out of reach and 36% saying that they've already achieved it. And if you look at it, the phrase American dream means different things to different people. To a large percentage of people, at 77%, it simply means having the freedom of choice in how they live their life. At second place, you have a good family life, retire comfortably, make valuable contributions to community. Owning a home and having a successful career is in the definition of less than 50% of people. The interplay of things here cannot be ignored. You can't have freedom to live your life if you're working a job that doesn't pay you enough money and benefits. You cannot contribute to community if a large part of your day is spent working. And maybe you're not going to have a family if you cannot afford to have a family, since getting a bigger house means a bigger mortgage and a larger percentage of your income going towards rent. Supporters of the dream now argue that this is why personal finance is more important than ever. Budgeting, saving, investing, making sure that whatever money you actually do manage to save does some work for you might be essential and the key to achieving the American dream. Even if you don't have money, focus on making good connections, since it adds to your own experience and opens doors for you that you might not have seen coming. The point of this video is not to be pessimistic and to make people give up hope and just lie down and not do anything. It's rather the contrary. It's to encourage people to look at things from a different perspective, look at things that you can do to achieve your own version of the American dream. Because the dream doesn't have to be a big house, a fancy car, and 5 vacation homes. It can be owning an apartment, having a dog, and spending your time like you want to. If you can do that, according to most people, you've already made it. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next one.